DIY Loop is one of the most powerful automated insulin delivery systems available, giving users a high level of control and customization over their diabetes management. With features like overrides to adjust target ranges in insulin delivery, as well as retrospective carb adjustments, Loop has helped many people with type 1 diabetes achieve tighter glucose control and greater confidence. Welcome to the show. I'm Justin. I have type 1 diabetes, and on here I talk all things diabetes tech, news, and management, and I have been using DIY Loop on and off for over 3 years now, and I love it. I've created countless videos on Loop, deep diving into it on YouTube, and I've also written about it on my blog. I've put links to all of those in today's show notes. And today, when you sign up for our bi-monthly newsletter, you'll get a DIY Loop introductory guide diving into the top features and drawbacks to consider when getting on Loop. You can access that with the link in today's show notes. Loop runs on an iPhone. It can also be controlled with an Apple Watch. However, it is not cleared by the FDA. You can't just download this on an app, and users must build the app themselves at their own risk. There are detailed instructions on loopdocs.org, as well as a fantastic community on Facebook in the Looped group. And for my Android users out there, don't worry, there's also another system called Android APS, AAPS. It's not the exact same algorithm, but it is similar. It has tighter control, more customization, and I have spoken about that here on my YouTube. And I also have a new episode coming out on the podcast soon with a user who is absolutely loving it and has like 98% range at all times. So I'll let you know when that comes out. Well, actually, why don't you subscribe on YouTube or subscribe on your podcast platform so you know as soon as it comes out. Today, we've got fellow T1D and Loop user Jake Giles joining me so that we can share our experiences getting on Loop, the level of support or lack thereof from our doctors, and a deep dive into key features such as overrides, logging foods based on glycemic index, retroactive carb adjustments, carb suggestions, and a lot more. Plus, we're answering your questions that you sent me on Instagram, giving you a little shout out in our Q&A section at the end. So make sure you stick around for that. Keep in mind that anything you hear on this podcast or content on all of my pages is not medical advice and is for educational purposes only. Always consult with a physician before making changes to your healthcare. Loop is experimental and not approved by the FDA or regulatory authorities. You take full responsibility for building and using Loop, and you do so at your own risk. Now for the conversation. Jake, welcome back to the show. It's so good to have you on again. How have you been?
It's good to be here. I've been great. I'm so ready for winter to end in Chicago, and today was like 50 degrees, and I feel renewed.
That's amazing. Wow, that's good for Chicago. I've escaped winter. I've just been traveling. I'm in Medellin, Colombia right now. I just got back from Santa Marta, so I'm tan. But yeah, my whole plan was to not feel a winter today, and it's working. So, and I go to Palm Springs next.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
it's gonna be gorgeous.
Yeah. So you were on the podcast, maybe a month ago, and that episode was very different than this one. That one was more talking about our kind of the relationship to being gay, coming out as having diabetes, and those social experiences, relationships, dating. How did it feel when you listened back to that episode?
It felt great, and honestly, the comments on your YouTube channel and just reading how everybody responded to it made me feel so satisfied with our decision to talk about it because it reminded me that this is a valid conversation, that we're not the only two people that feel this way, and it also was just a moment to kind of center our experiences, especially with diabetes. We don't get a lot of time to just pause and absorb how we feel about something, so it was a really great way to reflect.
Yeah, it felt really raw. I think things came out of me that I wasn't expecting, even like emotion. And I think it's great to have a moment to just kind of talk about the not so great parts of diabetes and how we handle them. And so it was kind of cool to have that little therapy session. And I hope it was helpful for people. If people want to go listen, it came out a few months ago. But today, I want to talk about DIY Loop and everything from both of us getting on it, what kind of went into that decision making, and then I guess we've been using it. I've been using it for on and off for 3 years now, and you're about the same.
Yeah, about 2.5 years now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so we talked about this on the last episode, but we met over like a dating app, then connected on social media a few months later when I was diagnosed. And then I started talking about Loop. I got on it, and then you got interested. So when did you kind of start thinking about Loop? And then what made you decide to start using it?
You introduced me to Loop, so I was really excited when I discovered that there was something that could connect to a iPhone without me having to use a PDM. I think that was the most appealing aspect to me, was not having to carry around two devices. And so when I found out that Loop could connect directly with Dexcom and I could do it all from my phone, that's how I got interested in the concept. When I realized I would have to build it myself, which we can talk about, I was a little intimidated, but I think what you also showed me was that there's this huge community of people that have done this before, of various ages and locations, and that I wasn't alone in doing it, and that made me feel confident about doing it.
Yeah, I myself found out about Loop through my diabetes educator. I did some research and I could just tell that it was something that I'd be into and want to do. And also having a healthcare provider tell me about it and say that it's something I should consider. I mean, that gave me a lot of hope for it. She couldn't get me set up on it. Like she couldn't build it. She couldn't officially recommend it and say, I am telling you to do this as your doctor, right? And she said that. She was like, why don't you go look at this? I think you'll like it. You can build it. And then if you come to me as my patient, I have no other option but to help you with it because you are my patient and I need to make sure you're being safe. So that's kind of like this beautiful environment that I had going into it. Not everyone has that. What was your experience getting onto it? Did you tell your doctor, hey, I heard about this DIY loop, it's not FDA cleared, I'm gonna do it, can you help?
I mean, I love that you had that affirming experience. I think we all want that when we go into an endocrinology office for any reason. But yeah, my experience unfortunately was a little different. I didn't have anybody recommending it per se, minus you, minus a community of people who were telling me about it, not recommending it. And when I eventually built it, I did talk to my doctor, my endocrinologist at the time, and it was actually my first visit because I had just moved back to Chicago. And when I told him I was using it, he basically was like, well, I can't help you. I can't tell you to adjust your settings. I can look at your Dexcom numbers. I can tell you, we can talk about your carb ratios, but in terms of the settings of this app, I don't know how it works. I can't really help you with it. And that was really it. Which,
Yeah,
yeah.
there are lots of doctors that act that way. The thing is, DIY Loop is a very real system that many people are using, and I feel like it's ignorant to be in that industry and not at least put some effort to understand it and get to know it.
Yeah.
But who am I to say like they should risk their license? I don't even know what the risks are, right? I
Yeah.
don't yeah, I mean many people are very open about it and do help people, so I feel like the risks aren't that bad, but then again, I'm not a doctor, right?
I would be really interested to hear more from endocrinologists about how they navigate that because, like you said, so many people are on it right now. And I think, especially with the integration between technology and this chronic illness, they have almost a responsibility to be up to date on the technology, not necessarily recommending it or prescribing it, but they should at least know about it and they should at least be able to direct people to information that they can research on their own accord.
And there are services out there that help people get on Loop, and it can be done through telehealth. I don't even know if it's always through insurance. So oftentimes what happens is people who are dedicated to this, they'll go and find someone who's willing to help them. And the community often is very willing to help. If you connect, if you are kind and you reach out to people and you ask for help, very often you'll find someone who's like, hey, I'll take a look at this with you. We can work on getting your settings together. That's not the experience I had. I luckily worked with a healthcare provider to kind of translate my settings from one system to this one. But there is an incredible community, which we'll probably get into a little bit. What was your relationship to diabetes technology at like around the time that you were considering Loop? What were the last few things that you had been using?
Prior to Loop, I was using the Tandem, T Slim, and Dexcom G6. I finally got back on an insulin pump after taking about 4 years off, honestly around the time COVID hit, because I really wanted to make sure I had my numbers as good as I could so I could avoid getting COVID or avoid the complications from it. And so that's when I got on the T Slim. And then maybe a couple years after that, what I was really struggling with was just the amount of devices and things on me. And I hated having something that I had to check in multiple places. And the screen on the Tandem, my phone screen, and I realized that if I pursued Loop, I could minimize the number of things I had on me. So that was honestly the driver. How could I make this as easy as possible so I don't have to pull multiple things out of my pocket?
Yeah, and at the time that you did that a few years ago, there was no Tandem T Slim app. There was no
Right.
Mobi pump or app to control it. There was no Omnipod iPhone app, right? So this was a time when you decided I wanted less devices, I want to use my phone, and this was the only option for you. Had there been an iPhone app at the time for your T Slim, or if Omnipod, if you were going to use that one, would you have just stuck to one of those FDA cleared systems?
It's a really good question. I honestly think that I at least would have tried them first. I at least would have opted for an iPhone app for the T Slim. And, if Omnipod 5 was ready for iPhone, I probably would have just migrated to that in the first place. But without that, again, that problem of having to have multiple things in your pockets. And honestly, like I always think back to summer and having to wear like my 5-inch inseam shorts. And I'm like, I don't want to have all this
Me
stuff
too.
on me like at all times. And so if maybe I would have tried it if there was more options, but there wasn't.
It's
As is often the case.
It's funny, like the one thing I like about winter and having all of the coat pockets are like all the diabetes supplies I can bring with me. I can bring
Same.
extra snacks sometimes because I have such a big pocket. I'll bring an extra pod. I typically don't
Yeah.
travel around with an extra pod or a vial of insulin, but if I have the luxury of a large pocket and it doesn't feel too big because I can go check it, in the coat check or whatever, or leave it in my
Yes.
friend's house, whatever, then I'll
That's
do
so
it. So
funny.
that's really funny. But yeah, in the summer, you want to have the least on you. And as guys, we don't carry bags as often. I mean, I love a
Right.
fanny pack or a little
Same.
over
Oh
the
yeah.
shoulder bag. But
Yes.
I also love going on a walk and not carrying things. So yeah, I mean, for
Yeah.
me also, it was a huge thing to just have the iPhone control my system. And then I also was wearing the Apple Watch at the time when I first started Loop. And I loved that I could just not even take my phone out, but use the watch. Of course, the watch is just really a controller for the iPhone app. So you can't leave your phone behind and use the watch. But if one community were to make that happen, it would be this community, and maybe one day that will exist. But for now, you have to use them together. But yeah, just that ability to, and there's no other system on the market currently that can do that. We do have the Twist pump that has an older version of Loop that will have it, and that's exciting.
Right.
Let's talk about like the research portion. So, like we said, you have to build this yourself. What or how did it feel when you went on loopdocs.org? That's where you go and look up all the information. How did it feel as you were going through that? Were you intimidated? Did you understand it? What was that like?
For me, it was like standing outside of a massive gate and just like looking up, being like, holy crap, I'm about to do this. I consider myself as someone who's tech savvy. I work in technology. And, I knew what something like GitHub was, but I've never had to really use it myself. So when I opened Loop Docs, I took what they said really seriously. Like they instruct you to read through things carefully because even though we're talking about how much we enjoyed it and how excited we were about it, it may not be for everyone, and that's okay. But you're not going to know unless you really read through all of those pages to understand what it is and what it is not. So I took it seriously, almost like a student of a class. Like I was like, I gotta really study. I gotta really know what I'm doing because this is my health, this is my life, and I don't want to go down this road if I'm gonna be putting myself in extra danger by doing that. What you're really tech savvy. How did you feel having to do this?
I was very intimidated, but as I began to read through it, I also got very excited. I don't read a
Same.
ton. I don't read as much as I would like to, but it felt so cool to be reading through this site, going through chapter from chapter to chapter and taking in all of this information. And it's written so freaking well. Like it's written in a way where
Yeah.
they're like, we want you to be able to digest this. We are going to speak in
Yes.
layman terms so that you can understand these big ideas. They don't need to get into the nitty gritty of how the algorithm works. That I mean, that's very intense, but they really get into how it works and um, how the settings work and building it. And when it comes to the build, they lay it out the instructions very well. There are two ways to
Yeah.
build it, as far as I know. There's one that you can use a Mac computer and build it with Xcode, which is the only way that I've ever done it. But you could also do like a browser build, a build through a web browser. Have you done that? What is the build that you've done?
I
Okay, tell
have.
us about that because I haven't
Yeah.
done that. What is that process like?
Yeah, and I was the same. I did the Xcode first, and like you said, the documentation is incredible. It's super detailed. There's screenshots. There's literally lines of code you copy and paste. Like
Yeah.
anybody can follow it. But the benefit of the browser build, and it's the exact same, I should say. It's still a very detailed how-to tutorial on how to get the app on your phone. That's the goal. But the benefit of it is you don't have to install something separate on your MacBook and you do all through test flight, which you learn all about, and you can install the updates there. So you don't have to rebuild the app. And if what we're saying doesn't make sense, like once people read the documentation, it will. But I found the browser build process easier. And since doing it, I've not had to even really touch the app, which is
Yeah,
great.
and the way that I've been getting Loop the last few months is I have someone else's like test, like someone invited me to a test flight. So I've been working off of someone else's Loop and they keep updating it. so
Oh,
so
oh
I
my
haven't
gosh,
had to
nice.
build Loop in a long time and thank you to that person for doing that. And that does exist too, but I think it's important for everyone who's starting to go through that process because
Yeah.
anything can go wrong. Like you could lose your phone and need to buy a new phone in a new country, whatever, and you may need to build it in that moment because you can't get in
Yeah.
touch with the person who's been giving it to you. So while that exists and I'm doing it, I know that if anything went wrong, I could go and build it. But yeah, I say build it first. Have you ever had like loop crash before? Or crashes, I mean, but crashes, like have you ever had an issue with loop where you were like, oh, this isn't working. I need help. There is an error.
Honestly, no,
Oh,
which is
wow.
crazy to think about. Yeah.
Well, I have had a couple issues over the 3 years I've used it. There were two times. One of them, what I was doing was I was filming a video for a company I was working at, and I had to keep doing screen recordings on my phone, and I needed the time in the corner to be the right time every time. So I manually was changing the time of my phone to 10 o'clock, 10 a.m. over the span of 2 hours that I crashed loop because you
Oh,
can't be
wow.
changing the time on your phone 100 times. So it
Right.
crashed. And this is the best part about Loop, though, and its community. I had this issue. I go to the Facebook group, Looped, and I type in, hey, I'm having this issue. And within 30 seconds, multiple people are responding and saying, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? Were you changing the time on your phone? I was like, yes. They were like, okay, this is a common issue. When you change your time on your phone, which you shouldn't do this. And then within 30 minutes of the 30 of the most stressful minutes, right? Because I was on a shoot for work.
Oh,
I got it. I got it down. And it was kind of cool because my coworker got to actually see like into the world of diabetes for a second, but no, it was terrible. And so, but that's
Yeah.
just a testament to how quick the community is, and why I have no worries using this system, because I know that they'll be there. Also, the best thing to do is, if you're in that Facebook group, there's a little search magnifying glass. You can search in there the problem you're having. Someone's had the problem. There's an answer
Yeah.
for you there,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Right. So
And that also just shows how stable, reliable the app is. Like that's one of the only issues you've had over the course of 3 years. Like that's
yeah. And
ridiculous.
the other issue I don't even remember. It was like a simple little glitch or bug, and someone just, responded to me within a minute, and it was solved. And that's no more or less problems that you'd have on an FDA cleared system, I think.
Exactly.
Like
Exactly.
I've had problems with one system where the pump wasn't connecting to my phone, and I was like, well, what do I do now? Like, so yeah, it's really no different. So yeah, this community is pretty amazing. This episode is sponsored by Omnipod. As someone with T1D and with an incredibly active lifestyle, it's important for me not to get tied up, especially with tubes on my insulin pump. I love to go swimming, lift weights, and play kickball with friends. And with Omnipod 5, I never have to worry about tubes getting in the way. Plus, not having to disconnect helps me to stay in range during all of my favorite physical activities. That includes sexy time too. See if you're eligible for a 30-day trial by visiting omnipod.com/diabetic. On there, you'll see full safety and risk information and trial terms. That's omnipod.com/diabetic. Let's get into the app itself. And I want to start with the ways we're interacting with food, because that's, one of the major things you have to manage with diabetes. So let's talk about like logging food first. With Loop, you can log foods using different emojis. There's like three main ones, right? There's the lollipop, the taco, and the pizza. And these are all for glycemic index. The lollipop being the highest glycemic index, meaning that food that you're eating will hit you the fastest, and pizza being the slowest. It will be an absorption time of 5 hours. And the algorithm gets to know this information. And I think that that's what I love so much about Loop, is feeding it the information of the actual food I'm eating. It has more info
Yes.
than any other system's able to take that's FDA cleared. What has your experience been with the glycemic index ability? Do you find that it works for you?
I definitely think it works. And also, I think it's one of those reminders for all of us. We're dealing with this 24/7, and certain aspects of the education that we've gotten over the time of having the illness just kind of go away, or you just forget. So, like, having to think about the food you eat in that context of glycemic index is helpful because it just makes you make better decisions, and it also just makes you more aware of how something's going to impact you. So that was one of the biggest reasons why I was so interested in using the app, because of the way it integrates food past just carb counting, because carb counting, it's a science but it's also not. And I think that having more pieces of data to inform how you're going to react to food, that was attractive to me.
Yeah, I think that was a really good point that you brought up about how this feature also acts as a reminder of different foods affect you differently. Like, what are you
Yep.
eating? And I find that not everyone is always accounting for the type of foods that they're eating. And they're really just
Totally.
simply carb counting, but carb counting is only half of the equation. It's understanding how foods will affect you, whether you need some sort of extended bolus. And Loop, because you're giving it this extra information, it knows whether to give you a form of an extended bolus or how long these carbs are
Exactly.
on board, which is amazing. Now, you told me last time we spoke that you can also use words when you're plugging in the emoji or that area. I had no idea. So are you doing that? Are you typing in words when you're logging in foods? And if so, why?
So yes, and it again is one of those features that is especially helpful if you're trying to understand how specific foods impact your diet. So I will say that I don't always use it. Sometimes if I'm going to eat a snack that is 15 carbs, I'm not going to put exactly what it is. I'm just going to use the lollipop knowing it's going to hit me faster. But I think something that people definitely should consider using the emojis for if they ever get on Loop is for sharing data with someone else, whether that be your healthcare provider or even yourself. You can type in, I had brown rice with coconut curry, and then reference back what that did to your blood sugar. It's harder to remember that exactly if you're just putting in an emoji, especially if it's the default one and you're not going back and changing it to a rice emoji or whatever. So being able to enter specific things is great for historical data, and it's great for showing an educator, hey, this is what I ate and this is why I skyrocketed to 300.
Yeah, and a lot of people who are using Loop are also using Night Scout, which is this
Yes.
platform that acts as like it's a website you access on a web browser that tracks and logs all of your pump data and your CGM data and all of your entries for foods and stuff. And it also acts as a conduit to different platforms, whether that be a display for your glucose levels, like on the Tidbit, which I have in the background of a lot of my episodes where I had a home and a set, and then just other apps and I think one big thing here, and why I think that the food logging with words could be very interesting, is the future of artificial intelligence in diabetes management, and specifically LLMs, learning language models, AI that you speak to and say, hey, what happens when I eat popcorn? And if you've been logging popcorn, whether it be the emoji or a word, the AI, the LLM, will be able to say, hey, well, according to your historical data, I found that every time you eat popcorn, you tend to rise higher and stay higher, or whatever it is, right? Or what happened when I eat lasagna, when I eat Italian food, whatever it is, when I go to this restaurant. And you can learn and interact with this AI and figure out kind of what your patterns and tendencies are. Because the one thing about Loop that I wish it did differently is after 24 hours, all of your carb entries disappear, and then
Yes, agreed.
it'll just add new ones. And I guess I don't understand why there's no like back catalog. In fact,
Yeah.
FDA cleared systems have a back catalog. so
Yeah.
so it could just be the way Loop is built. But even what would even be cooler, and I realize the people working on Loop have day jobs, but even if there was like a Loop Clarity app where you can go back and, well, that's what Night Scout is. But it would be nice if it was just in that phone. But I think that there's a lot of promise with AI when it comes with diabetes management.
Yeah, I love that idea. I think we're in that phase of AI technology integrating with diabetes where we're all trying to figure out like what is the best way to use this that is going to keep us safe but also inform us and help us make better decisions. That's a great example. When I first started on Loop, I wasn't really using the food entry system. I was just using the emojis. But then when I realized, like, you know what, I just want a little bit tighter control. It was actually a diabetic educator who was like, well, why don't you just enter all of your meals and type it out specifically, and then we'll go over it together. But she specifically had to tell me, like, take a screenshot at the end of the day because then it wipes out. So it is a feature that I hope someday they find a different way to address.
Yeah. Even if it just, you could create a Siri shortcut to open up the app, go to that page, take a screenshot, and then there you go.
That's a good
Yeah,
idea.
yeah,
There you go.
yeah. One thing I also love about this system is the ability to retroactively adjust carb logging so that you can let the algorithm know just how many carbs you ate. When this comes in clutch, when I go to a restaurant, I put in 75 grams of carbs and the food comes out and it's just like horrendous, and I'm like, I am not going to eat this, or I'm going to nibble at this, but I am not eating half of this plate. But I'm like, I just logged 75 grams of carbs, got all of that insulin. I don't want to drink a Coca-Cola to bring me up. I don't want useless carbs when I'm still going to need food,
Right.
which is like the worst thing about, like, I feel like that happens a lot with diabetes, is like the over anticipating carbs and then having to eat throwaway carbs.
Yep.
So what I'm able to do is I can go in, adjust, hey, I didn't have 75 grams. I really only had 25 grams. It will do its best to bring you up and not have you go low.
Yep.
Odds are, if you don't
Love that.
manage in some way to get some food or eat a snack in a certain period of time, you probably will go low. But I mean, just the fact that you can do that, you can adjust that and then in 15 minutes add the carbs that you're actually going to eat, something like that has been amazing. Are you retroactively changing carbs at all?
Yes, I
Yeah.
literally just did it an hour ago. I
What happened?
forgot to enter this giant ass coffee I got from Dunkin' Donuts that has a few pumps of some sugary syrups in it, and I saw myself going up. I was like, "Oh damn!" And so I got to retroactively add that, and now I'm
Well,
great.
and that too, right? So what you did was you went in, you put in carbs, and then you changed the time, which you can also. So that's a
Yes,
whole other thing. I mean, it's all part of this. The controls here, though, is you can go and add carbs at whatever time you want. I don't know if there may be like a block for like how far back and how much forward you can go. You can log that in and be adjusting, which is just a control that when I've left Loop and gone and tried other systems, I didn't realize how helpful it was until I didn't have it. And I was
yeah.
like, oh, wow, I feel like I'm more on my own.
Like you said at the start, food is just such an important part of all of this that you would think that these apps would really optimize around it and have more features for customization and flexibility. And there's some additional loop features around that. But just the fact that things change when you're eating, life happens. These apps need to do a better job of leaving space for those things to happen and documenting it.
Yeah, the twist pump that has an older version of Loop that's FDA cleared, when that comes out, that system will have the ability to retroactively change carbs within 1 hour, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. And usually, you
Yeah.
usually don't need more than 1 hour anyway. What about meal recommendations? So I used Loop for years. I stopped for maybe 9 months to try out Trio, IAPS, and other systems. Then I came back to Loop, and all of a sudden, Loop has this new feature that allows you to, or that it will recommend carbs. It will have the carb logging menu, swipe up and say, did you eat 15 grams of carbs or did you eat 25 grams of carbs? And when I saw it, I was like, I don't know. I don't think so. That was kind of my first reaction when I saw it. How have you interacted with meal recommendations?
To be honest, not a lot. And in those situations too, it's another example of sometimes you don't exactly adhere to what you did for whatever reason for your carbs. You enter 20 carbs initially and then you decided, oh crap, I'm gonna go for a walk after that, so that should have been 30, but then guess what? You didn't walk fast enough, so you're still going high. That just doesn't happen to me enough. However, I still think it's a fantastic reminder because yes, sometimes you do start going up a little more because you entered the carbs in wrong. So yeah, take that moment to ask yourself, should I adjust? So even if you don't use it exactly, I think the fact that it is trying to like make you think about it is super helpful.
I think that once I got over the initial, why are you doing this? No, I didn't need this. I think that more often than not, I'll agree with the
Yeah.
recommendation. The only time I won't is if I'm going to be working out soon
Yeah.
because it doesn't know that. And I think that
Yep.
that's important information. Sometimes I don't mind that I'm going up a little higher because I know I'll come down. But I found that for the most part, I have a good success rate with allowing that to go through, confirming. Maybe I've gone low once from it. I definitely have gone low
Yeah.
once from it because that's why I still have a little unease with it. But I kind of look at it with critical thinking and I'm like, okay, you know what? Yeah, I probably did eat more there. This is right. And
Yeah.
it's great to have that. And um, other systems even have their, meal detection technology. That's specifically for Medtronic. And what about favorite foods? This was also a newer feature that I've never used here, but are you using that?
I am. I tend to have a cold brew with chocolate milk every single morning, and it's a very specific brand of chocolate milk, so I always know what it's going to do to me, and I save that specifically as a favorite food. There's a few other items from restaurants that are local that I've saved. And I should mention that it's not a perfect science because of course there are other things that impact your levels, but it at least is a pretty damn good guess. So if I enter that this 25-gram glass of cold brew with chocolate milk, that's what I had at 9 o'clock in the morning. If I'm going higher, maybe there's something else that is making that happen. But that's a great baseline to start with. So yes, I do use it.
Is favorite foods, are you using it because it's saving you time clicking? Where are you accessing those favorite foods that makes it a faster process?
For me, it's the favorite foods registry that when you're entering carbs, that's at the bottom. So like if I'm gonna enter my chocolate milk and cold brew, it's already there for me. It already has the number of carbs, it already has the absorption time, and so that's quicker to me for me just to scroll down to that rather than entering that every
And
time.
then
And it has the name of the food too.
okay, so I'm assuming what's also nice about that is when you go back and look at all the food you've eaten that day, you can distinctly see, oh, that was my breakfast, because it's just something you
Yes.
can recognize.
I call it morning brew. So every time I scroll to that, it automatically enters
That's great.
everything. I can look back throughout the day and see that, oh, actually, it was less than I thought. And I don't always measure my chocolate milk, so maybe sometimes there's more or less, but it'll tell me earlier today you actually had more carbs than you expected or less,
Yeah.
whatever it may be.
Another feature that I used to use all the time, and I just haven't been using lately, is the pre-meal target. So what this does,
Same.
there's a dedicated button to it on the phone, right on the home screen, also on the Apple Watch app. You tap that, what it does is it brings your target range lower for 1 hour until you log carbs. Once you log carbs, that range goes away, you're back to normal.
Yep.
I think I used to use it so often because of the accessibility of my watch on my wrist. So I could instantly think, oh, I'm walking to lunch, let me put this on. And I think just the fact that I don't have that control on my wrist, that's why I haven't been using it. Because I do wish I was using it. I love it. What are your thoughts
Yeah.
on it? Do you use it regularly or no?
I'm the same as you. I feel like when I first got on Loop, I think the fact that it existed and was just readily available, I did use it more. But at the same time too, it's just one of those things that either I forget to do it or I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen in between the time I set it and when I eat. So in order to have more control for me, I don't always turn it
Yeah.
on.
Well, speaking of target ranges and that override, there's also one of the most valuable parts of Loop would be all of the controls and customization you get from overrides. And
Yes.
there are so many reasons to use this and so many different ways to use it. So I kind of want to get through all the ways you're using it and talk about the ways I'm using it. Tell me about some of the overrides you have and what you're using them for.
Yeah, like you said, one of the best features. Another reason that I wanted to migrate because of how accurate and easy it was to mirror what was happening in my real life. So I would say that one of the ones I use the most is errands. That is like, hey, I'm gonna be walking. I'm gonna be on a bus. I'm just gonna be moving more than I am when I'm at home.
It's so
So I don't want
funny.
my blood
As soon
sugar.
as you said that, I was like, oh, I know what you mean. Like, I know what this is for.
Right. Errands,
Yeah.
like we everyone has their own version of what like busy looks like for them, so that it's an extra level of peace. It's a peace of mind. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, I know that if I have my errand setting on, I'm not going to go as low if I don't eat or if I do more walking than I anticipated. It's really a safety
It-
blanket, so it is one of my
and what's it
favorites.
doing?
So in the errands, my errands override is specifically trying to get my blood sugar between 110 and 140, that range. Because like that is the comfortable range where I don't feel like I'm low because I'm doing too much activity, but it's not going to go higher than that. And therefore it's just a little bit more flexible. So for that time, I'm getting, I think it's targeting 110 to 140 in that override.
And no change in insulin delivery. Your insulin delivery is staying the same.
Yep,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay. I definitely have a couple settings that are in this that do the same thing where they change my range, but they don't change my insulin delivery. One of
Okay.
those is something like errands. I don't think it's called errands, and I don't have my phone open, but it's definitely just a higher target that makes me feel more comfortable going into whatever activity I'm going into, that I'm just going to be a little more
Yeah.
strenuous, walking around, going to the mall, whatever it is. Another one that's similar, and it may even be the same one that I use. It's called it's called like bad low. So what I learned from my educator was that once you have a pretty gnarly low, once you go under 70, your your liver already released all of the glucose that it had, meaning
Yeah.
that you are much more likely to go low again because your liver's not helping you at all. So because of
Yeah.
that, after I have a bad low, I set my range to 110 to 140 for 6 hours after that.
Mm.
And that guarantees me, not a perfect science, that I won't go low because I'm just setting a higher standard. And that's actually a newer thing over the last maybe year that I've been using that, because I had no idea. She told me about the liver doing that. And I was like, oh wow, like I didn't know you don't have a backup supply. So that's been a really key thing for me. And I like that ability to just do that. Of
I
course,
love
other
that.
systems have that ability, and maybe I just help people out a little bit with being able to use their system to do that. But I think what's the most exciting part of Loop is not only the ability to change your range, but to change the amount of insulin that you're getting, whether
Yes.
you want a little more insulin or a little less. And I'm sure everyone listening can understand why, but let's get into, do you have any overrides that boost your insulin?
The first one I have that I can think of, and I think I got this from you, was it's a high override. It's like if I am like stubbornly high for whatever damn reason, like maybe I'm just being lazy on the couch, maybe I just ate something that I did not properly count. If I set the high, it's giving me a 20% increase in the insulin that I'm getting for a certain amount of time. I think the duration I've set for it is 4 hours. It might be less. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah, you may have gotten that from me. Maybe we talked
I
about
feel
that
like I
because I
did.
have that too, and I use that when I have a stubborn high. I don't put it on immediately, right? The stubborn high needs to stay
Yeah.
up for at least an hour or two, and once I have that, I'll increase my insulin delivery by up to 20% and have it
Yeah.
go for about 4 hours typically. And then I also set my range not as low as it typically is, maybe a little higher, so that it safely brings me down. And I find that I use this most often when I know that I won't be moving because
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
unable to go on a walk and fix it myself. Because whenever I'm able to go on a walk and fix my levels myself, I will. Because it's a much
Yeah.
more perhaps safe way, or not safe. You're just more in control. I use this high override when I'm going to sleep. It tends to
Oh,
be when I
yeah.
do it because I'm not going to be able to make any changes. I'm not going to be able to give myself
Yep.
a little bolus. And I will also say the thing with Loop and me, I rarely, if never, rage bolus. Rage bolusing isn't a thing that
Oh,
I ever do. And maybe that's the
yeah.
power of Loop, because I like to eat crazy things. Um,
Same.
that's not to say I don't have stubborn highs, but I am confident in Loop that it will bring me down and I don't need to intervene in a rage. And also, rage boluses are
Yes.
very unsafe. And I don't want to put
Yes.
myself, and I'm not, everyone should do what they do. I'm not going to say it's not the right thing to do because I'm not a doctor, but for me, it doesn't feel like the right thing. What about you? Do
Yeah.
you
I
rage
agree.
bolus at all, or did you rage bolus?
I did.
Okay.
I used to be a big rage boluser. I think it's something that I'd be interested to hear more about in general from like a scientific perspective because the rage bolus is our way of like taking back control. It's like I see these numbers going crazy. I have this method in my pocket. Maybe it's an insulin pen, maybe it's my pump, but I have control to bring it down. But like you just said, we all know that can be really dangerous because if for some reason the insulin just hasn't hit yet and it does take a few hours, then yeah, you're going to crash and then you're in the opposite and then you find yourself in those spirals. But with Loop, I do not have to rage bolus. I probably have like entered a maybe a 0.25 here and there, but not because I was so high. It was just because like all right, I'm gonna help this along. But with the overrides and with the targets, you just don't have to do it as
Yep.
much.
I think I'm the same too. I'll sometimes give myself anywhere from zero point 0.2 to 1 unit max,
Yeah.
and that really depends on what I'm seeing and if whether or not I even put on my high temp override. Sometimes I don't feel like I need it. I just want that little boost. And oftentimes I do a calculation in my head of this is how much it's recommending. Let me add 20%, whatever, which is something that I picked up from my educator. But that was there's more to it than that. There's timing to it and
Yeah.
everything. Another time, something that actually happened recently is I have an override set for when I'm sick, but
Mm.
it's only a certain type of sickness. I have found that viruses, they do not affect my glucose levels unless it's like a stomach virus, but that's different, right? Like that's affecting your
Yeah.
eating habits. But I overall, like viruses in general have no effect on my glucose levels. Bacterial infections 100% affect me. And like
Yeah.
time after time after time, I'm like, I can tell when I have a bacterial infection or a virus. And I recently had some sort of bacterial infection in my throat. My levels just would not drop. They were stuck. They were stuck hovering around 180 for maybe 4 days before I finally saw a doctor and got antibiotics. And within like 4 days came down. But this is not the first time. Like every time I get COVID, it's a virus. No issues with blood sugar, but
Yeah. Same.
bacterial, it's something I find. So what I did was I needed for almost 2 weeks total. I boosted my insulin delivery by I don't know if it was like it was 15% I needed, and even 15% wasn't perfect. I maybe was hovering at 150 the whole time, but it was better than before. Do you have
Yeah.
a sick override? How do you use that?
I
No.
don't.
Okay.
I don't. And it's similar because I've noticed throughout my life of being diabetic and when I get sick, like I don't see a massive change unless, like if it's food related or stomach related, that's a little bit different. But otherwise, yeah. One other override I just thought of too that definitely got from you was the drinking and dancing override,
Where yeah,
right?
no, that's
I'm pretty sure I
no,
got that
you
from
definitely
you.
got that from me because I used the little dancing girl with the dress,
Yes.
and I mean that one's clutch,
Classic.
and it's so true. And the reason that's different than errands is because alcohol is typically involved, at least when I use it.
Yep.
So what I would
Same.
do with my dance feature, and I'm not sure how you're using it, but I have a higher target and a lower insulin delivery. I lower insulin by
Exact
about
same.
20% to account for
Yeah.
movement and alcohol, just to lighten the drops that you get. And that's why I also have a higher target range so that if I do drop quickly, I'm not dropping into the 70s or below.
Same. I think we must. Yeah, I definitely got
I
it from
have a
you now that I
YouTube
remember.
video
And
where I talk about my overrides and do a walkthrough, and you've 100% watched that. And I'm glad you brought it
yeah,
up because people should go watch all my other loop videos and stuff that I can throw in
yes.
the show notes. Today's episode is sponsored by T1D Exchange. You can directly make an impact on diabetes healthcare, treatments, and technology by participating in the T1D Exchange registry. It starts with a simple survey about your life with T1D, and it only takes about 15 minutes. After that, you'll have a personal portal with ongoing T1D study and survey opportunities. Plus, some of these studies even offer compensation. Signing up with the link in the show notes helps support my channel, and it allows me to continue putting out free content. You can sign up at t1dexchange.org/diabetic or click that link in today's show notes. How are you using overrides with workouts? I mean, that's huge.
That is huge. And to be honest, it's been a journey trying to figure out which ones are the ones that work for me because for a while I was using a higher target override with like I want to say like 20 or 30% less insulin when I was lifting weights.
Okay.
And and that was kind of a journey because I realized that like all right, when I'm lifting my blood sugar doesn't really do anything. It doesn't go down like I would expect from physical activity. In fact, it like stays up. So it just was not working in the way I thought it was. So I have a new override that is just strictly like all right, I'm going to work out. I want to have like 30% less insulin and I want my target to be in this, and that has been great. That is what I use every time I go to the
And are
gym.
you also using that with weightlifting?
Yes,
Okay.
everything. It's every time I do any kind of physical activity at the gym specifically,
Okay.
that's what I
Because
use.
I think weightlifting, I've heard many different things. For me, weightlifting, not ab exercise is different. Weightlifting doesn't affect my glucose levels. It doesn't go up, it doesn't go down. But for a lot of people, cortisol release is big. and that will raise your blood
Yeah.
sugar. And a lot of people who do weightlift, and maybe they're weightlifting like higher amounts, maybe like, because I'm
Yeah.
toning a lot. I'm not trying to like do like bodybuilding as much. It's more like a tone. So
Yeah.
it may not release as much cortisol. So, but a lot of people do have that. And I know a lot of people will use
Yeah.
an override and increase the insulin. For me
Yeah.
though, when running is involved, and I think it's also important for us to say that whenever you're using these overrides, they should be turned on 1 hour ahead of said event,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
insulin takes time to activate. We already have insulin in our system. So if you don't turn it on until right before it, well, there's all this insulin that just got released in your system and will activate. So I never go low from running unless I turn on my override 30 minutes or less before. Then I'm
Yep.
guaranteed to go low. And I don't want to eat snacks. I'm not going to eat gummies before I go run. What's the point of running? But I mean, I
Exactly.
understand doing that, but I hate having to combat my exercise with gummies, because it's like it erases the carb loss. Anyway, where was I going? Oh yeah, so when I run cardio, I decrease my insulin dosage by 60 to 70%
Yeah.
an hour before.
That sounds about
Yeah.
right.
So, and then my target range goes from, it's typically around 90 to 100 ish. I don't know the exacts because I'm not holding my phone. And I set it to 140 to 160 when I'm running. So
Yeah.
we're getting significantly less insulin, a target that's very high. And if I turn that on an hour before my run, I never go low. Never.
Love
And
it.
that also includes even if you want a snack in that hour, because your system knows that that setting is in. If you eat an apple, it probably will say you don't need insulin for that, or you need very little. So it's accounting for that, and that's also another big reason for it, right? You want any snack to not have an effect on your system. Working out has been the number one thing for me.
Yeah, that one of the easiest ways to go low, obviously. And that's another good point too that you just made me think of, is that when you have an override on and you are entering carbs, like Luke tells you, like, hey, you have this system override in place. Like, just think about that when you're making this decision. Like, you probably know, but that extra reminder is super helpful.
What it's doing is it's adjusting the insulin it's recommending,
Right.
right? So like if I
Right.
didn't have the override on, it would say 1 unit, but I have that override on, it's saying 0.05 units, because it's like d- those carbs will help us get to the range you want, right? So
Yes.
that's just so powerful, and it's something that I've missed when I've gone away from Loop. It's the number one thing I've missed. I think that for the most part, everything else I can do without and be happy, but losing overrides, and not even just overrides, but losing an override for a workout is a big must for me. And it goes for going on a bike ride, it goes for going on errands, like any type of activity that is a speedy thing. I try to set that override on ahead of time, and
Yeah.
it saves you.
That that drinking and dancing one too that we talked about, that's one that I will leave on like all night. Like when I get home from drinking and dancing, like I just leave it on, because you don't know how your blood sugar is going to be impacted hours after drinking, because you still have that alcohol in your system. Most likely your liver is still trying to do work. So it's just, yeah, it's just a really handy way to manage your life alongside
Yeah.
diabetes.
And I think people who are listening can understand why this system isn't FDA cleared.
Yeah.
Obviously, you and I and so many others are using it in a very responsible manner that's allowing us to get results that are phenomenal and feel super
Yeah.
comfortable in these activities we're doing. But if used incorrectly, could easily result in a very bad hypoglycemia and potential death. And has that
Yep.
happened? I don't think so from Loop, and if it has, it's happened so little that that it's not a thing. It just the same amount as anything else out there. But this is why the FDA exists. This is why Loop isn't cleared. Although, like I said earlier, a cleared version of Loop, very close to what it is now, not exactly
Yeah.
the same, is available. It will be available with Twist. And so people who are listening who are like, I don't know if I don't want to do a cleared system, but I do want Loop. Like there's things about this, then that could be a pump that they consider.
Yeah.
But also, I'd be remiss to not say that another reason I like using Loop is because it works with Omnipod, and I like the form factor of
Yes.
Omnipod. Right?
Yep.
Like it's just
Yeah.
I forget it's there. It doesn't have a tube.
Yep.
It's comfortable and so easy to use. And the best thing is like packing Omnipods is so simple. It's like it's this package, and you don't have to worry about like boom, boom,
It's
boom.
got it all.
Yeah. So
Yep.
I think another like one of the other things that are the best about Loop is its ability to work with Omnipod and then seamlessly between Dexcom sensors, G6 or G7. I do know that the Android version, AAPS, a version of DIY, does allow for other CGMs, but I wouldn't be surprised if Loop one day allows for all those.
Yeah. I can't remember, but yeah.
Okay, Jake, before we go, I did put out on Instagram, I asked for questions for a little Q&A segment that you and I could do at the end. All right, the first one I'm going to throw to you, Jake. It is from dpedro09. What is the best place to get started with this process?
I mean, Loop Docs is the best place. I think that Loop Docs is the best way just to get the factual information about what you're about to do. However, I would also say, and I was not paid to say this, Justin, your pod, your channel is a great place to start because you talk to people who use it, you talk to the people who make it, you talk to people who could benefit from it. So even watching previous videos of Justin's or finding a community of people talking about it, I think that's a good way to start hyping yourself up and preparing yourself for what you're about to do because you'll realize you're not alone. You'll get excited about it too. So then by the time you do start reading through the nitty gritty of how to build it and get it on your phone, you feel a little bit more confident, which I think is really helpful.
Yeah, and that's Loop, Loop, docs, docs.org, which is where you can go to learn about it, read how to build it, get connected to the community and the Facebook group. And like Jake said, I have a ton of great resources on my page and my social media. I'll put the links to like a bunch of videos in the show notes so you can check those out after. The next question I'll take from Little Cat 2021. Would you suggest Loop to someone as their first approach to pumps and closed loops? It was mine. It was my first closed loop system ever. It didn't matter that I hadn't used any others. I learned it. I learned how the system worked. I did my research. I worked with a specialist to get my settings in and help me understand how it worked. So I think that if you're going at this in the smartest way possible, in a responsible way, working with others, really trying to find a professional who can help you do it, because I think that's was the key thing for me. I don't see it being an issue starting with this. I don't, and what's the thing with Loop is that it was designed to be simple, to look like an app for iPhone. It doesn't have a lot of settings. It doesn't have a lot of controls. It does have more customization than other systems, but they're very tangible. And I think just doing the research, it really lays it out well for you. What would you say, Jake?
I think if I would have started with Loop, I would have been fine. Especially if you can start familiarizing yourself with the terms and how the app advertises itself, how it displays on your phone, like starting to get to know those things, I think will make it less intimidating.
This next question comes from Loads of Milk. Would you recommend for a little kid? So I will first say that neither Jake and I are here medically recommending this to anyone. We're just simply talking about our experiences, answering your questions to help you better understand it. What I will say is that many parents have built the app and are using them with their kids. So if you want to connect with other people who have done that, I think the community Facebook group Looped is a great place to start to talk about it and see if you're comfortable with it. Children are using it, but it is not FDA cleared. So I can't say that enough. Next question from C. Joe Anderson. How does Loop handle pizza? Jake, what do you think? And you're in Chicago where the
Well,
pizza is freaking thick.
exactly. Well, I should also say two things. One, pizza's my favorite food. Two, real Chicago pizza is tavern style, and all Midwestern Chicagoans watching this will be like, yes. But that's not to say I don't enjoy me some Lou Malnati's or Giordano's on occasion. So, like we were talking about earlier, you can enter specific foods with different glycemic indexes. Pizza has its own emoji. I use that glycemic index, the one that takes the more time for the carbs to digest anytime I eat something like pizza. And so I enter the pizza, I enter the carbs with the amount of slices I think I'm going to eat. It's usually more. And I let it do its thing. And honestly, I can't remember any issues where I just stayed too high because I ate pizza. More than ever, I mean, I should say I have some of the best numbers of my entire life from using this system. Not an advertisement, not paid to say that. But pizza, especially, it just handles it better because it has that flexibility and knows to give you more insulin in a few hours after you eat.
I will say pizza's pizza. And no matter what system you're on, pizza's the worst on blood sugar management. You should eat it. I eat it. It's one of my favorite foods, but it's just an annoying food to eat. It's so high in fat and it's not a perfect science. But Loop does a fantastic job. It does no worse than any other cleared system. And I think that it does better a lot of the time. Is it perfect? No. Do I get those stubborn highs? Yes. Do I have an override for that? Yes. And that's what's really special about it, right? So if something does go wrong, there are backup mechanisms for it. But again, pizza is tough and it always will be until it's not. And we have tech that is even stronger. We have Yushan underscore C saying, can you talk about how Loop, other Loop varieties, Loop, AAPS, Trio, etc. I have on this channel, I've got videos on Trio where I'm talking to developers, to people using it. I used it myself. I've got a video on YouTube explaining that. AAPS, I also have an interview with someone. I have another one coming up with someone who's been using it for a couple months now. He has like 98% in range, like at all times for the most part, on average, whatever. And he's very happy with it. And he wanted to talk about his experience. So if you want to learn, if you're an Android user and you want to learn about AAPS, stay tuned for that. That's going to be a great conversation. Him and I just geeked out on our first call. He had only used it for a month though. So I said, listen, I need you to use this another month at least, because he was super hypercritical looking at it all the time. I was like, I need you to get it to a point where you're not looking at it. I need it to become background before we have that conversation. So I'm excited for that. It'll be fun. And I have another one. We have another one from C. Joe Anderson and Asra T1D about the same type of question, which is, how did you fine tune your settings or get your settings on Loop? Like I said earlier, I was very fortunate to work with a diabetes educator. Back when I first got on it, she took my numbers from a non-AID system, translated that, and got me on it. And then more recently, we kind of did a refresh, and she looked at everything again, and we refined some settings based off of a new FDA cleared system that I was using prior. And I will say, since I did that, like, my settings on Loop have been phenomenal. So fine tuning, setting up settings, if you can, find a professional that can help you. Back up the communities out there, but I think that, finding a professional who's open to working with Loop is the way to go. Jake, you've worked with some professionals, right? I think I connected you with one and then you found another one. What has your experience been like working with professionals with refining Loop? Like, I know that the first one was to help you get on it or get your settings right, but why did you choose to go to another person later?
Yeah, for almost honestly for some of the reasons that you just mentioned, that once you're on a system like Loop for a while, it does a great job of learning from you, and you can stay at a certain level. But if you really want to get to the next level of control, or if you just kind of want to refresh yourself on how the app works and what some of these settings mean, that is a good reason to seek out additional education. And I actually connected with the integrated diabetes management. I think they're based in the East Coast. That was also really reaffirming because they had professionals who knew what the app was, and they that did not exist in my endocrinology office. Like, people knew what it was, but they couldn't help me fine tune it. So I think it's one of those things that, if even if you're using it, it's super helpful to check in with a professional who can just take an objective look at your settings and your numbers and recommend changes to help you get to that next level of control.
Yeah, that's great. And also Gary and a few of the people from Integrated Diabetes Services have come on this show to talk about this stuff. They're
Yeah,
great, super helpful, and a great resource. Jake,
highly recommend.
thank you so much. This was first of all so fun because I don't really often get to just geek out on Loop and talk about strategy. So I've learned a few things from this. And it's always great having you on. We'll have to find another reason to get you over here.
Hey, I'm ready. Yeah, this was great. You gave me some overrides to think about. I actually now I want to go look at my settings and tweak them. So yeah, this has been awesome.
Thanks for listening to the show. Let me know what you thought of the episode in the comments on YouTube. Are you a Loop user? Do you want to be a Loop user? Comment below with your thoughts. If you are listening on podcast platforms, why don't you go over to YouTube? You can see some visuals of Loop on this video. You can watch it again and kind of study. And you can also see all of my other Loop content. And I've also written about it on the blog. The blog also has my newsletter. So if you sign up, you'll get that newsletter twice a month with updates on diabetic tech content, as well as what is going on in diabetes technology news. And don't forget, when you sign up for our bi-monthly newsletter, you'll get a DIY Loop introductory guide diving into the top features and drawbacks to consider when getting on Loop. There's a link to that in today's show notes. Jake came on the podcast a few weeks ago and we spoke about just like the social side of diabetes, dating, friends, relationships, bad lows at concerts. It was a fantastic episode, a very raw episode for both him and I. If you want to check that out, I've also thrown that in the show notes. Thanks for listening. I'm Justin, and I'll talk to you later.